But yeah, so I guess a little bit about me. I guess I was born in Houston, made my way back here, now work at the Texas Tribune. So if you don't know about the Texas Tribune, we started in 2009, and we're a nonprofit, and we do try to be as nonpartisan as possible. We cover only politics and policy in Texas, and any newspaper in Texas is free, basically anyone is free to basically take our content and run with it, the idea being that as Capitol bureaus shut down, they will still have our content to sort of supplement, so people are still educated out in the Menard Weekly News, where my grandmother, still gets, even though she's moved to Houston now. They run our stuff, just little papers like that. Then on Fridays and Sundays, we're in the New York Times. If you pick up the New York Times in Texas, the New York Times pays us for that, so don't tell them that they're getting sort of a bad deal, I guess. But anyway, so I've been covering higher education. I've been there since we launched in 2009, covering higher education the last few years. It's become a much hotter topic than I anticipated when I got the beat. So I thought I would just sort of make the case for paying attention to higher education at this point. It's at a big turning point in many ways, politically, sort of planning-wise. So the state has a 15-year plan for higher education that started in 2000. So it's in its last year. It's going to end in 2015. And the goals of the plan were to get it up to par. It's called closing the gap. So the goal is not to make the state amazing. The goal is to get the state up to par with like California, New York, and other comparable states. And so a little update on how that's going. It's important because the statistic people like to throw out is that in the next decade or so, about 60% of jobs will require at least a degree or a certificate in higher education. Currently in Texas, about 30% of the adult population, a little more than 30%, has a higher ed credential. Another way of thinking about that, this is from Complete College America, which is one of those. There's like a new cottage industry of foundations that are sort of designed to figure out ways to get students to graduate. But in Texas, they said for every 100 or so students who enroll in higher education, about a little more than 75 will go into community college, and in 4 years, about 7 of them will graduate. About a little over 20 will go into a 4-year university, and about 13 of them will graduate in 8 years or less. So that's how we are doing here. I mean, the good news in Texas is that more people are going to college in Texas than ever have. The problem is that there are also more people in Texas than there ever have been. So it's really, we're sort of meeting our participation goals for this 15-year plan. It looks like we might hit our participation goal. Enrollment has slowed significantly in the last couple of years, but it looks like we're on track. We're also on track for our awards, so the number of awards we hand out annually. So it sounds good, but if you scratch the surface just a little bit, you see that there's a lot of left to be desired. Hispanic enrollment in Texas has consistently stayed below target levels. Obviously, as demographics shift, this will be increasingly problematic. White enrollment has actually fallen off the cliff since 2009. In 2009, it was up about 90,000 students statewide. Now it's at around 60,000 students, and they don't really know why it's dropping so fast. There was some thought that it was because of all the jobs in the oil fields, but I was talking with someone at the coordinating board just on Friday, and they said, well, we looked at that, and those jobs aren't as good as everyone says. Maybe for a high schooler, a $20,000 job is enough to make them not go to college, but they don't actually think that that's the reason things are dropping so fast. And then the African American community actually is way above their goals, but it's almost all women. The African American male community is sort of far behind. You see that gender gap in every ethnicity and in every state. It's not just in Texas, but the gender gap is particularly wide. I think when they make their new plan, they're working on a plan for 2036 now, and I think the gender gap will play a big significant role in that. I think, for the African American females, 55% that graduate from high school go straight into college. About 44% of the males. And actually for white males, if you brought the white male participation up to the white female participation, that would actually erase the drop that they've seen since 2009. So the gender gap is going to be a big issue. And what's interesting, despite the sort of the big disparity between women and men going to college in STEM fields, which is really the critical part of the success goals for the state, is STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. So things that we sort of need, going forward. Only about 1 in 5 people that get awards in STEM fields in Texas are women, and that is a statistic that does not seem to be improving. If anything, it's getting worse. In 2003, 26% of the people who got those awards were women. In 2012, it's dropped down to 21%. So for some reason, that is not going up. The state is not going to meet its goals for awarding STEM degrees in 2015. The coordinating board has basically said at this point it doesn't seem possible. They were hoping to be at about 27,000 degrees annually, but instead they're stuck at about 18,000. And if you think about a lot of the jobs in Texas are going to be technology jobs, are going to be out of, oil and gas related. You're going to need people in STEM fields who know what they're doing. Teacher certification was also a big goal. They set that as a specific subset of their success goals to get more teachers in Texas. Some people will say, but I know teachers who are unemployed, they can't find jobs. But even acknowledging that employment opportunities currently are a problem, teacher certifications are a priority because of population growth. They think that they're expecting that teachers to be one of the fastest growing fields in the state in the next decade. And those teacher certifications have a similar trend line to white enrollment, where it goes up and then it hits about 2008, 2009, and it just goes like that. And I think now last year, from 2011 to 2012, the number of teachers certified dropped 24%. So it's down to about 18,000, and the state was hoping to have about 38,600 in that year. Math and science teachers in particular are about half of where the state wanted to be. So if you are concerned about math and science, and you want the future generations to be educated in it, encourage some young people to consider teaching. There's some great programs. Actually, University of Texas, I don't know if you guys know about the UTeach program, but it's sort of, I ran into Mark Stroma last night, who's the state representative from here, and he always calls UTeach the Teacher America that actually works. And basically what they do is they try to pick the really smart science majors and convince them to go into teaching. And then it's sort of place them around the state. And it started here at UT, and it's gone national and been very, very successful. But, just one program at one school is not enough to get those numbers up to where they should be. And then you hear a lot, I'm sure you've heard a lot about.
I have a question. The goals that they were setting, what were those based on? How did they decide that they wanted 38,000 teachers certified? That's a good.
Part of it was just looking around and seeing. They talked to Steve Murdoch at Rice, who was a state demographer when they were putting the plan together, and he's still sort of the go-to demography guy. I think they just looked at the projected population, sort of what they needed for participation goals. They wanted it to get to 5.7% of the adult population of each ethnic group participating in higher education, just because that seemed to be the sort of the mark of a sustainable higher ed ecosystem. And we're sort of below that. We're almost at that statewide, but if you just break it down, many individual groups are sort of below it.
So that 5.7,
they leave out Asians in there.
That 5.7% came from,
I think, looking at California and New York, basically. They just wanted to bring us down from being sort of what they consider at risk of being sort of an uneducated state to being a pretty educated state. Not exceptionally educated.
Don't want to go overboard.
I had a question about the Hazelwood exemption.
Yeah.
How effectively is that being utilized for veterans?
So the Hazelwood exemption is basically, it's almost like a GI Bill, right? You can go to university. It's being used pretty well for veterans, and it's gone up and up. Okay. I think a tough part about it, so for Hazelwood, is that it lets a lot of people go to school for free, and then they tweaked it in 2009 so that veterans' kids or even grandkids could go for free. If you could basically, it was basically transferable credit. And so it's cost universities a lot of money. And so the universities have been in this thing where they want to push back against the Hazelwood exemption to some extent without not appreciating veterans and without sort of getting into politically difficult territory. Mm-hmm. So what actually the state did, this was a good thing that they did. They set aside some money this year that was sort of sitting around in a fund that hadn't been used for years. And they said, we will use this to reimburse schools for Hazelwood to some extent. It still won't cover most of the costs, but it is a program that's been growing and growing. So I think it's going pretty well. But I'm not sure that universities feel like a lot of impetus to educate veterans about it because they worry that it does cost them money.
Is there any caveat there? Like, do you have a teacher persona, or do you have to be...
For Hazelwood?
Yeah.
You have to be a veteran.
And that's it?
More or less. And it's
Texas veteran. Yeah. And it really only covers tuition and not fees, because last time I went to school at UT, I got the tuition covered, which was a little bit, and then the fees were probably at least as much as the tuition.
Right. I mean, and of course, tuition and fees are just going to go up and up.
Yeah.
Right. By barring some sort of miracle. Every year you hear people talk about, maybe we'll regulate tuition again, and then I don't think that's going to happen. I did a story last year, heading into this last session, basically looking at the majority of both the Senate and the House have at one point voted in some way to re-regulate tuition on different bills. If you break down the votes and look at sort of who's involved, but I don't think anyone would actually, if that bill came forward, it would actually pass. It's just the universities would stop it. They have too much clout.
And this is probably a whole other topic, but have you looked into at all why tuition seems to be rising so much when you expect it to rise a little bit over the years, but like way beyond inflation?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the tuition in Texas was sort of artificially low, so it was going to jump really fast percentage-wise. Of course, that's not just a Texas problem.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of the arms race, in higher education where schools are expected to do more, right? I mean, you're supposed to, there's no reason, well, you can say there's no reason. UT has like a climbing wall in its gym, so there's this amenity arms race going on. And then you have, aging professor populations. I mean, the administrative bloat is a big thing that you hear a lot about. I think there are various areas where you can that you can blame, but it's probably just a complicated combination of universities are expected to do more and more, and that requires more administration. The administration is pretty intractable. It's like once you're in there, you're not leaving necessarily, so they're just going to add other things. So I don't know the exact answer, but in Texas, really tuition is still sort of relatively. It's much higher than it was in Texas, but countrywide, we're sort of middle of the pack tuition-wise, if not at towards the bottom of the middle. But I mean, I have the stats for UT here. I think 20 years ago, UT's budget was about half state appropriations, and about about 6% tuition and fees. And now it's about 13% state appropriations and about 25% tuition and fees. So, I mean, you also have declining state appropriations, and you have to make up for that money somewhere. It can't all be philanthropy. Philanthropy used to be in the single digits. Now it's I don't have it right here, but it's it's gone from 7% to 30% or something like that. And even so, this year we had an increase, about a 4% increase in funding for higher education in the state. And you hear a lot of lawmakers like, we give money to your colleges, they'll go back to their districts if they have a university in their district and say, we increased funding for higher education. But that 4% increase does not at all make up for the two sections of cutting higher education funding that came before it. And it doesn't account for, they're also pushing the schools to get their enrollments up as part of the participation bill. So,
is there a growth in online learning from the University of Texas?
From the University of Texas, at Austin specifically.
Not specifically. Throughout.
Throughout, yeah. I mean, the schools that have really been probably the poster child for online learning is UT Arlington. They have a online nursing program that almost, I mean, this is an exaggeration, but it seems like it doubled their enrollment. You see their enrollment just go like that.
Because I can see that would change the dynamics if you really concentrated on letting people do internet learning. It would save you an awful lot.
Yeah, but the jury's still out on how some of these things will be effective or not. There are different models of online learning, and everyone's trying out different things. UT Austin just tried to do massive open online courses for the first time, which is basically just open enrollment. You can have thousands of people in a course.
But it shouldn't cost you as much money as the other kind.
That's right. But it depends on how it seems like the most effective way for educational outcomes is to do some hybrid learning, so they just did a course over here that was an online course, but it was also a real course, and it was sort of like a live television show that was interactive, and that thing was actually pretty expensive to put on, but that was different. But online learning in general is growing pretty fast, with a lot of encouragement from the state. And that worries some people, right? Because it's it's not the traditional thing. But it's growing pretty fast. Everyone is pretty much, if you're not doing online learning at this point, then the legislature, the coordinating board is going to punish you in some way. So everyone's sort of investing in it. The UT system put $50 million into a transformational learning institute a couple of years ago, and I don't know.
Well, a lot of private schools are starting to go really, really head into it.
Oh, yeah. Well, you saw, the first schools, it was interesting, so there was massive open online courses. The first schools to really do it were MIT and Harvard and Berkeley. It was the elite schools that were getting into sort of giving away their content for free, not the other way around. So I think there were some people at UT Austin that were sort of, you talk to professors over there and they rolled their eyes at the MOOCs, they call them, but the people, the top schools are the ones that are leading the pack on that, so it's probably good that they're doing it rather than sitting around.
Well, a lot of big companies in the high-tech industry are moving into that interactive learning stuff, like particularly after the computer.
Mm-hmm. And it is a way, so obviously with if you're getting less and less money and you're expected to churn out more students, online learning is a good way to do that. You expect it's like season 5 of The Wire, more with less. It's sort of the mantra.
Well, you still have that cost of tuition, because that's
not going away.
And that's not going to go away. But a lot of things can be taught, like for instance, general mathematics courses can be done by interactive learning.
Right.
It's not changing like history changes every day, every week, every year.
Well, you have so the MOOCs, you can take the class basically for free, but that's sort of, you get out of it what you will.
It's like
but then you can get a certificate, and if you want the certificate, that's going to cost you.
Sure. But otherwise, it's just like auditing a course, right?
Right. I've never done an online course myself. It's one of those things I report on them. They're out there. I'll probably never take one.
Well, I've done it a few times in the sales world, because when you go to work for a company that has a big product or some product line on it, you have to sit down and you actually have to do this stuff every week and turn in the information every week, so you learn the products and how they approach it in the marketplace.
Well, and it's actually, and there are benefits to it for professors too, because you can literally see every answer that a student gives, and you can sort of track what they're
doing. And you can correct them as it goes.
Right. The problem so James Pennebaker and Sam Gosling are 2 professors over at UT, so they did this sort of hybrid online class, and they found much higher than average instances of cheating on their tests, it's easier to measure responses. It's also easier to see that this, like 20% of the students were cheating or something. So they're working on, on the other hand, they were able to reach many more students than they would have in just a traditional class. So there's just they got to figure out the balance of it. And that's an ongoing project.
I teach at ACC, and we occasionally hear about, and so we have online courses too. So you have an online course, and then you have a classroom version of it. What they find is that you get much poorer results for the same course with the online version in terms of their mastery of the material or their dropout rate, and everything seems to be somewhat better with the classroom version of whatever course they're dealing with.
I think there's a lot of talk of flipped classroom basically, and you hear this in K-12 too, where you sort of you basically do your lecture at home or your lecture online, and then come in and sort of grapple with problems that might have traditionally been homework in the classroom, so people can help you with that. And there's a lot of sort of reconsideration of how both to integrate online learning and classroom learning, and sort of just rethink the way classrooms work. And that's probably good. You see, UT has this ongoing $3 million course transformation project that looks into a lot of this, but then if you go to their presentations, a lot of the course transformations turn out to just sort of be an engaging teacher. Ask students to participate in the classes, don't just sort of lecture and take polls in the middle of class. So some of the transformation isn't quite transformational, I don't think. But
you've had since 2009, enrollment's been going down quite a bit, at least for WIFE.
Yeah.
And tuition has been going up. But 2009 is sort of when the economy went down. And you got almost how much of a percentage of students, I guess increase in percentage of students are having to rely on student loans. I mean, how big has that been going up? Because that tracks a lot of people for life.
Yeah.
And most of these people can't even get jobs a lot of them when they get out, and they still have these student loans hanging over.
Yeah, that is, that's an ongoing problem the state sort of hasn't been able to figure out how to grapple with. They cut their main student grant program in 2011 for the first time. And they put a little more money into it this year, but they also changed the rules so fewer students can get it. And that'll improve their statistics, as fewer students can get it, the percentage of students that are eligible who do get it will increase. So it'll look great for that. But
is that also a type of student loan that you can't get out of?
No, so that's just a grant. That's great. That's sort of their the poor students that want to go to school. Now it's the poorest and smartest students that want to go to college will be able to get it. But for loans, that's an ongoing problem. They have the state has this program that they thought was going to be a total game changer called the Be On Time loan, where basically you get a loan, a no-interest loan that can be forgiven if you graduate with the average in 4 years. And the problem was because of federal rules, as soon as they forgave that loan, suddenly you had to report that on your income taxes, and then you had to pay huge taxes on it. And it was just the whole thing has been a mess. But the idea was sort of okay. They just couldn't figure out how to actually administer it. But no, that's an ongoing problem. You hear the student loan debt is sort of outpacing credit card debt. It's that's like a massive problem. People say it's going to be. People talk about it as if it's like the next big bubble to tank the economy, but it probably doesn't actually. There might not be enough people in higher education to actually tank the economy. But that's just a problem. And then you have more predatory lenders because the students want to go to college. Part of the pitch that the state is trying to do is they want to push people out of school as quick as possible, because the best way to not have loan debt is to get your degree quickly. So they are just trying to come up with programs to do that. But sort of because they have no money and they're working on it. And most of that comes from the federal level. I don't know, but more and more students are on loans, because you have part of the push, and this is a good thing, right? Is that you have more students that in the past would not have gone to college are going to college, but the only reason they're able to do it is because of student loans. But it's just a problem. So. Anyone else? I can keep rambling. So you have sort of like we've been talking about there, sort of multiple forces pushing and pulling on higher ed, right? You want to get more students out. You want to figure out how to keep those students, and because of the loan problem, most students are working also, and actually schools now are trying to discourage students from working while they're in school because it makes it much less likely that they will graduate on time. So you're trying to keep students in, you're trying to get more of them out. UT is trying to, they said that they were going to raise their 4-year graduation rate to 70% by 2016, which I can almost guarantee you won't happen. Right now, it started at it's about 53% graduate in 4 years from UT, and just you can't make a 20% jump in 4 years.
What's the history on that? What was it like 20 years ago and 40 years? That 50%, is that kind of...
You know, I don't know. And the coordinating board data only goes back about 10 years. I think people have started to worry about it much more in recent years, especially as data gathering has become sort of more, now just... The coordinating board website actually is a pretty easy to use resource if you are interested in higher education information. They really put a lot of data out there, including all the graduation rates. UT has UT and A&M are basically, they have the highest graduation rates. Then it drops off pretty quickly. When you get down to some of the smaller schools, Texas Southern and University of Houston downtown have a 3% 4-year graduation rate. But if you wait 6 years, then it goes up to 10%. So there's some improvement. And that's a constant point of contention because at most schools, like even like in Texas State, Houston State, you're not going to see much improvement after 6 years. At UT, Austin, or Texas A&M, if you're not out in 6 years, chances are you're not going to get out. There are some people, but the percentage, it moves from 4 to 6 years, like a 30% jump, 6 year to 10 years, maybe a 4% jump. But then you see UT El Paso, the 6 year to 10 year jump is huge. So you do have to sort of understand your population. And UT El Paso has been very vocal about saying don't penalize us just because we have low 4-year percent graduation rate, or even a 6-year percent graduation rate, because we do get our students out. It just takes them 10 years, and that's because a lot of them are working.
Is there any such things when you get your degree and you go out looking for a job? I graduated from the University of Oregon. It's a lot different back then. Are there companies that will, if you have something they want, will pay off all your school debts?
There are actually companies. I'm working on setting up a panel for South by Southwest EDU about sort of since you mentioned Oregon, have you heard about the sort of pay-as-you-go model that they're trying to...
I get this magazine from them about once every 6 months. They're asking for money, basically.
Well, this is not quite to your question. I'll try to get back to it. So the Oregon legislature approved looking into a new funding model for higher education that basically says you go to college free, and then after you graduate, you commit to giving us, 4% of your income for the next 25 years. And there are actually private companies that now will do that, where they'll sort of, and this is all experimental, I think there are only like 2 of them, but they'll sort of they'll sort of pay off your student loans, but then you have to commit to paying them a percentage of your income for a certain number of years. And then, and there's actually the Texas State Technical College system has basically adopted a very similar model that's just gone into place, where basically same thing. Their funding will be entirely based on the income of their graduates, which sounds risky, but apparently it works out.
It's a good incentive to teach them well.
Right, and get them good jobs, right? Especially if you're at a technical school, and job placement's a big part of that.
Well, for scientists and engineers, for instance, with really high demand stuff, it doesn't seem like an unplausible idea to go to these people and say, part of my package that I want to get from you is you pay off my debts and you get a tax credit from the government for doing it.
Well, there's some, I think Harvard will basically, if you go to Harvard Business School and wait around, after a certain number of years out of there, they will just sort of forgive your debt to some extent.
When you got loans, that's the problem.
Yeah.
There was a story last week about some kind of school. I wasn't listening to it that close. There was quite a few of them, some kind of privatized school, and they would advertise these incredible job rates of their graduates that would get out. And it turns out they were paying like Whataburger and McDonald's to hire these people, even though they had they had real, degrees and stuff. And they just hired them for like 6 months or so they could say that they got them a job. And then they fired them, and they just hired the next group of students that came out.
Yeah, you do have to be careful about that. That's a common problem with, especially when you get into community colleges and technical schools. A lot get accused of inflating their job placement numbers, since their job placement number is going to be more scrutinised.